Hello everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the Holland Land Office Museum's Artifact video series. My name is Ryan Duffy and I'm the director of the museum. And this week we're going to talk about an institution that was here in Genesee County and was representative of wider institutions, but was one that helped out children of all ages from many different backgrounds in order to reach new heights, but also to be able to find some normalcy in lives that did not have much of this. So this week we're going to talk about the Genesee County Children's Home. And for most of its history, it was actually housed in a very famous building here in Batavia, and that was the Richmond Mansion, where it was housed from the 1920s until its closure in the late 1960s. It was actually the last main tenant of the building before it was torn down around 1970. So a lot of the modern history of that building is associated with the children's home and the children and the organizations that ran it and the children who lived there. So we're going to learn a little bit more about the Genesee County Children's Home and its connection to the Richmond Mansion. The history of the Children's Home begins in 1919 when the women of the Ware class of the Presbyterian Church began the institution. Early members of the organization included Alice Day Gardner and Pearl Buckles. They sought to provide the children in the area a temporary refuge that might be living in troubled situations. Their first location was a house rented at 19 Bank Street, and their first year they had 3 children under the care of Etta Brown. In 1921, in the need of more space, it moved to the Farrell property at 434 East Main Street, which was purchased with the help of a public fund drive. In 1928, they would again reach out to the public to move to their final location, the former Richmond Mansion. At that time, the property was owned by Walter Stroh, and he sold it to the Children's Home Association for $25,000, a large portion being contributed by Ernest Woodward and his wife. The first matron at 311 East Main Street was Mrs. Martha Engel, but she soon retired and was replaced by Mrs. Grace Peck. She would remain until 1934, when Mrs. Lydia Cornwell of Buffalo was chosen to run the home. She left in 1942 with May Brumstead being hired to run the home, and she was there until 1956. The office of the matrons was located on the first floor to the right of the front door, and that's where Mrs. Brumstead worked tirelessly to make the residence a real home for the children. She made great strides in integrating the children into the community, as many organizations such as the JCs took the children on trips and brought them gifts for Christmas. Members of the association also sponsored individual children to go shopping and enjoy other things most other children took for granted. Now, living in the home, girls and boys slept in different dormitory areas in the home. The younger girls and boys slept upstairs, while the older ones slept in what had once been the Richmond Ballroom. There was even a playground behind the home full of equipment. In the 1950s, several other improvements were made in order to keep up to building codes. This included enclosing the central stairway and putting fireproof doors in the rooms as a means of fire prevention. The last matron of the home was Eleanor Miller, who ran the Children's Home from 1956 until its closure in 1967. She continued the works of her predecessor and even began a scholarship fund, which was financed by the Woodward family for some of the children that lived there. In addition, she set up bank accounts for every child who left the home. The Children's Home system as a whole began to be phased out as early as 1962. In that year, the state made a recommendation for a switch to the foster home system that still exists today. Genesee County Children's Home would exist for 5 more years before it was closed for good. During nearly its 50 years at the Richmond Mansion, 840 children were admitted and helped. After the Children's Home ceased to be, the property was then sold to Batavia School District before it was demolished in 1970. Well, I hope you enjoyed this edition of our Artifact video series and learned a little bit more about the Genesee County Children's Home. If you've enjoyed this video, check out the rest of ours on our YouTube channel, Holland Land Office Museum. And if there's any that you particularly like, give them a thumbs up or even subscribe to the channel, as it helps us out a little bit, but also gets you notified ever quicker when there is new material released. But as always, the best way to learn more about these topics is to come and visit us at the museum yourself, and we'll be happy to share even more information than what's just included in these videos.